Welcome to another episode of Career Tea. I'm super excited for today's episode and our guest Tatiana, who is in the field of law and currently an associate attorney. I don't want to give too much away from the episode, so we'll get right into it. Tatiana, welcome to Career Tea. I'm excited to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here too.
So this is currently, this is a field that I'm in particular, I've always been excited about and interested. Back when I was younger, at a time, I kind of wanted to go towards the field of law, but due to other circumstances, I went towards other majors and other fields. So I'm excited to kind of get to know your journey and how your undergrad and your internships and your career and how you got to become an associate attorney. So with that being said, I want to understand and learn about, where you grew up and kind of where you went to, high school and how that kind of shaped about where you wanted to apply to go to school for undergrad.
Yeah. I grew up in Brooklyn in Carroll Gardens. I went to high school in Bay Ridge at a private school called Poly Prep. It had some positive. It was really great education. It had some negatives like all high schools. But one of my teachers, I remember he was a lawyer before he became a teacher. And so we had one class where he had us do a mock trial. And I remember liking it, but it didn't really spark anything. It just kind of was, oh, this was fun. We did a cross-examination. He gave us a grade, and it kind of went out of my mind because I became really interested in international affairs. I have a super international family. I travel a lot. I go visit my family. I used to go visit my family once a year during the summer for 3 months at a time. So I always grew up having a very international kind of lifestyle, I really enjoyed it. I think it opened my eyes to a lot of things. What it especially opened my eyes up to is just the different ways the world exists. My dad's Pakistani, so I'd go to Pakistan. I think I went 3 times during middle school, high school, and that played a huge part in me wanting to work in international affairs initially because it just made me realize how small the world was, and just limiting myself to New York and the US just ironically didn't interest me, considering that ironic is now I'm very limited here.
Yeah. So could you explain, for those that don't know, and I'm not super knowledgeable on it, what does international affairs entail in I guess law?
So it's funny because I don't have an international angle right now with law. It's a little bit difficult because when you decide to become a lawyer, you have to take the bar in the country and the state that you're going to be practicing in.
Got it.
So I can practice in New York in the US. I'm applying to DC right now because we're going to be filing some cases in DC, but if I wanted to practice in Connecticut or California, I would have to take their bar all over again. If I wanted to practice in France, if I wasn't working for an American law firm working on American law just in France, for example, you see that a lot with corporate jobs. They'll hire American attorneys to work in France to educate might not be the right word, but to instruct the attorneys there on American law. So any contracts that are happening are valid in both countries. You don't really see it for the type of law that I'm doing. I would need to get a master's in law in the country I wanted to work in, and then take that country's, legal exam, whatever the version is.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Is there, I guess, if somebody has they pass the bar, let's say here in New York, and they want to pass the bar in a different state, how similar are those, I guess, bar exams?
Yeah, there's what we call the UBE, the Universal Bar Exam. I think 22 or something states recognize it. So if you've taken that in one state, you don't need to take it again. So New York has reciprocity under the UBE, right, with 20-something states. So I wouldn't need to take the bar again, for example, for DC. I don't need to take the bar again. We have reciprocity. California has very different laws. California might as well be its own country. So I would have to take the bar again there. And California has notoriously the most difficult one. So you kind of just have to look at the state that you want to practice in and look at the rules before you're able to figure
Got
out
it.
if you need to take the bar again. And then once you start practicing, the laws can be a little different. Some of them are the same. It's just you just have to check the laws every time.
Yeah, makes sense. So you said that you had the teacher that used to be a lawyer before, and that kind of inspired you from the little practice mock trial that he had, and
Yeah.
inspired you kind of to be interested in law, correct?
It definitely sparked something. I would say the real interest came during my first internship in college.
Okay.
My freshman year, I was working at a company called Contour Global, and they would invest in renewable energy in different parts of the world. So I did a rotational internship there, which included me working in their legal team, their legal department. They also put me in tech, finance. I wasn't really interested in the rest, but the legal one really stuck with me. And it was things like looking up different laws to see what was possible, what kind of laws we needed to be compliant with. I was specifically assigned to work on a research project in, I want to say Cameroon. I think Cameroon, and I had to look up what were the law, like the renewable energy laws there, what kind of contract laws there were there, and it was very, it was definitely in over my head as a freshman in college, but it really sparked something in me. I really liked the attorney I worked with, so much so that at the end of my internship, they said, "Well, you have one more week here. So, which department do you want to spend your last week?" And I went straight to legal.
Okay, nice.
hmm
So before we go a little farther into that, I want to touch base on what school you chose to go to for your undergrad,
hmm
and what major did you choose, and how did you come upon that? What inspired you to choose a school and a major?
I went to George Washington University in DC. I wanted to be, growing up in the city, I wanted to be in the city. I couldn't imagine being on a campus. And DC, when I visited it, I actually really liked it. I thought it was really beautiful, really, um, really just very metropolitan, very much smaller than New York. But I was kind of drawn to that for a short while. Then I missed how big New York was. Um, and I decided to do a degree in international affairs, specifically in Middle Eastern studies and national security. Those two things. At first, it was just Middle Eastern studies because I'd taken a course on it in undergrad. In high school, there was an optional course you could take
On international studies,
on
international affairs.
Middle
Okay.
Eastern politics specifically. I think that year, 2011, 2012, which would have been my senior year in high school, there were more conflicts in Israel and Palestine, and so I was really interested in that. I wanted to work in that, so that's why I decided to go into Middle Eastern studies. As I was working, through my degree, I realized I had enough credits to add a second major, or concentration, which was the national security, and I ended up writing my thesis on kind of the financing of terrorism, because 2016, as we all remember, ISIS was really on the scene. I wrote about how ISIS, Al Qaeda, other terrorist organizations were able to finance themselves through terror, through fear, and manipulate fear to turn into literal dollar signs. So that was pretty much my my college career.
Yeah. I guess international affairs. It's kind of cool that your high school kind of offered that class to take it, because like in my high school we didn't have such a thing, and I guess if they didn't have that class for you, maybe you wouldn't have even known, that area or that major to go into undergrad.
I don't think they did it again after my year. I think it got very contentious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they didn't do it twice.
Was it because maybe there weren't enough students?
No, there was a lot of fighting.
Oh, there was a lot of fighting.
There was a lot of arguing.
So at the time that you chose international affairs as your major, did you have an idea that you wanted to go towards the career of law, correct?
No, I did want to be more in international affairs. My grandfather was a diplomat for Pakistan.
Okay.
But after that first internship, that's when I started becoming more interested in law. And I thought, well, I could be a lawyer, and I'd love to be an international law lawyer.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to, I guess, from beginning, they wanted to go towards law, would you suggest that major? Like, would that be something that would help you kind of gain advantage in, getting into law school and I guess kind of being on the right path?
It's funny because it really doesn't matter what you studied in undergrad. Everything will become relevant at some point. I would say if someone's interested in becoming a lawyer, to get an undergrad degree that they're interested in. There were people in my law class who had been fashion majors, people who had been music majors, people who had been finance, pre-law, everything across the board, and everyone found a way for that to apply to them, or did a complete 180 away from that. One of my friends, I think she was a fashion major in undergrad, and she works at a firm now, but on the side, she works on the fashion and law section of the New York bar. She started the fashion and law club at Fordham, where I went to law school. So you can find a way to make anything relevant to law. I mean, everything involves law. It's a lawyer at some point, but I would really encourage people to do something that they're interested in, because it's very difficult to find something that you actually like to study and like to do.
So I guess since we're touching on this now, if somebody was, let's say, like your friend who was in fashion in a completely unrelated major to law, and after graduating, they wanted to go towards law, do you think they still have a good chance of getting into law schools with like no law background, no law internships?
Yeah, Elle Woods did it. Yeah, you can absolutely do it. It's just a matter of your grades. Okay. That's really all that matters when you're applying to law school. It's your GPA and the LSAT. The LSAT is not as important these days. I think they've been the same way that with the SATs, they're realizing it's not the great equalizer that everyone thought it was going to be. Yeah. But what it comes down to is really your grades. Your GPA is going to be the only thing that matters when you're applying to schools. You could put together a great application, and that'll help. Networking helps a lot. I know personally, I networked my way to Fordham, but really grades are just the number one thing I would say. If you're interested in law, really, really get good grades.
Nice. I know you did quite a few internships in your undergrad, so I kind of want to go over your internships, what they were, and kind of what you learned in those internships. Yeah. So let's touch base. I know you already mentioned a couple of them, but what was your first internship that you got, and how were you able to attain that?
The first one I got was the Contour Global one, the renewable energy company. Yeah. I was lucky I was able to reach within, my personal network. It was someone that my dad had worked with, who had mentioned in passing, if you're ever interested in working, come work for us, especially if you don't know what you're interested in. So I recognized I was an incredibly fortunate and privileged position to be in, to have someone in my network offer me that with no experience as a freshman in college. And I think I was able to learn a lot from that. Yeah.
Would you, I guess if you were to go back, would you have done that internship over again?
I think so. Yeah. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun. It was my first experience as a 19-year-old working in the city at a huge office. That was in Washington? That was here. That was in New York City. And then they also sent me to Paris. They had an office in Paris. They knew I had family there, and they said, if you want to work in Paris, go work in Paris. So I got to work in their Paris office. So I got to do legal work in the U.S. side and the Paris side. I really liked it. Made some great friends as well. Nice.
And was that during your freshman year of college? That's pretty nice to get like an internship freshman year. Because I remember when I was in school, it's so hard to get an internship as freshman. Everyone's like, you haven't learned anything yet. You gotta at least be like second year, third year to start getting internships. So I think you got a good head start on that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I would really encourage people. I think this is really drilled on us in the New York City high schools. Just network. And it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you're 18, fresh out of high school, but it really makes all the world of a difference. And you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to. I mean, my firm just hired an intern in college, and it's because she reached out to us and she had interest, and we said, yeah, we'd love to have someone come on and learn and figure out if they want to be a lawyer.
Yeah, I think at that young age, I mean, I know I was intimidated, it's so scary to go
Terrifying.
network. And a lot of times you can't really like foresee, how good networking can be and what it can bring you. Now, when I look back and like as I'm growing older, I'm like, wow, networking goes a long way. Even if you don't necessarily have the necessary skills for the role, if they like you, if they like your attitude, they know you have good work ethic, they'll always hit you up for a position available.
Hmm.
So where did you go from after that internship? What was your
So
next internship that you got?
um, after that, I had an internship in Bangladesh. So like I mentioned, my family is Pakistani, so I was. This was my junior year. My sophomore year, I actually did the reverse. I didn't work. I didn't have an internship. I worked at NYU doing a digitizing project. They paid $20 an hour to scan stuff. But then my junior year, uh, I had been talking to my family members about how I was interested in law. I was thinking about getting a law degree, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And I knew I wanted to have some sort of human rights angle. I was really interested in. I didn't want to. I knew I didn't want to go and do corporate law or corporate litigation. I wanted to be in the human rights, possibly public interest field. And my uncle in Dhaka, Bangladesh, he started a public interest law firm in the 90s that offers free legal services to marginalized communities within Bangladesh. And so they said, look, if you want to come work for us for a summer, feel free. And I said, okay. Um, it was definitely very out of my comfort zone. I'd gone to Pakistan 3 times by then, but never alone. And even though I was going to be living with family, it's different when you're working and going to work every day alone. And, you're looking, you know, I wasn't going to be speaking the language. I wasn't going to know anyone. I was a college student. Everyone else was a law student. But I would say it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. I not only got great experience, they put me on some children's rights projects, women's rights projects, reproductive rights projects that I found really interesting. But I think I really kind of, I just developed a lot more confidence in myself. There's something about being uh, alone in a country where you don't know anyone, don't know anything, don't know the language, that is really good for your confidence.
What was the language they spoke?
Bangla.
Bangla.
So you learn, you pick up some stuff pretty quickly. So I learned, importantly, left and right, so I could tell the rickshaws how to get me home, telling them left or right.
So is that did they speak English? I guess like how did you communicate? Because the language barrier itself, but then there's the law language as well. How difficult was that?
So because Bangladesh was colonized by the British, a lot of their cases are in English. A lot of their attorneys speak English. They learn English in schools, especially in law school. So all the case law I'd be reading was in English. The cases themselves that were being worked on were in Bangla. So the attorneys working there would handle the caseload. And then me and the other interns who were from Canada, we would do case law research for them. So we would be going through the stacks of legal books that they had, looking through the case law, trying to find things that were relevant for their arguments. That's the kind of stuff that we were doing.
Did you have to do a lot of like prep before? Because I know you said like laws are gonna differ from city to city, country to country. Did you have to do a lot of like prep before you went there on like their laws or anything?
No, they threw me right off the deep end, right into it.
No language experience, no law experience there.
Nothing. They're like, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was another place that I was just very, very lucky and very fortunate, especially to have a family member who said, just come work for me for a summer. If you like it, great. If not, you can go home.
Yeah. And you said you got a lot of experience with international law and human rights there. How did that like shape your viewpoint on like human rights, international law, and especially from a different country versus, I guess, US that you live in?
It made me realize that while there was differences in the, nitty gritty laws, wasn't that much of a difference in how people are able to obtain representation, whether that's here or in Bangladesh or in France, marginalized communities don't have access to the same resources as the rest of the people in a city, or the people who are more fortunate. That was it's the same everywhere, unfortunately, and that was kind of something that I wanted to work more, just kind of work within that field, being able to address those issues, like those problems that people were facing, where they needed legal representation, and be able to do it for everyone, not just those who could afford to pay for it.
Yeah, makes sense. And that's a great experience that you got. You learned a new language. You learned some
learned
new
2
laws.
words.
2 words. Do you still remember any of the language or no?
I think bane and dane. So it's like bane with the B is left, and dane with the D is right.
And dane.
I think. Okay. If I might be wrong, but we'll see.
Nice. So you come back from that internship, and that was your second year?
That was my junior year.
Your junior year.
Yeah.
Did you have any more internships? You're already stacking up on so many internships by your third year.
Yeah. I didn't have anything after I graduated. At that point, I'd taken the LSAT twice. I knew I was going to law school. I was getting my applications in order. And I knew that once I got to law school, it wasn't going to stop. I was going to go from law school to internships to work, with really no break. So I took a break after college, and I traveled solo for a year.
Okay.
I did the first half of the trip with a girlfriend. Her and I had met in a yoga class. We became really, really good friends. And we decided, well, let's just move to Australia.
Oh, wow.
See what happens. So we worked as waitresses for 3-4 months in Australia. We worked at a steak bistro. That's why I don't eat red meat anymore, because I eat Wagyu beef every day, twice a day for 3 months.
You reached your limit.
I can't.
Lifetime limit. You reached it in 3 months.
And so then we started traveling for a little. We went to Vietnam. We went to Bali together for a month, Vietnam for a month. And then I had actually found another job in Thailand, working for the Asia Pacific Women's Law and Development. And what that organization does is they provide legal aid to women throughout South Asia. And so they've got projects kind of everywhere. They are mostly funded by the UN, and they take funds from the UN, or funding from the UN, and they invest in sustainable practices for women. So, for example, one of the projects that I was working on had to do with the adverse effects of climate change, where there's extreme climate change, events like flooding, fires. You see women's rights start to backpedal because there's no money, there's no food coming in, there's shortages, there's just instability, and so you start to see women's rights falter. And so what this organization did is they provided, I think, 11 different women's organizations throughout South Asia with a small stipend for them to develop women-led groups that would help bring in income. So one of them would create like artisanal, I think, bags or something that they would sell. Another one was for crops and agriculture. And it was up to the groups to decide how they spent that money. They applied to us. We went through the applications, and we would decide which ones were going to be receiving the grants. And then we sent them all to Nepal to do a training on how to use the money, how to make sure the money was accounted for. We gave them a phone that they would then use to record kind of their growth, because we also, the APWLD was interested in having a sort of social media angle to it to bring awareness to what was going on. I don't know how much that has taken off, but I really thought it was a cool, secondary side to it. Just kind of like, let's track how this progress is happening online. Let's bring awareness to the fact that where there's climate change, there's a falling or a faltering of women's rights.
Wow, that's so cool. Even when you were kind of taking a break, you ended up kind of back doing some work. So when you said you were in Thailand, how did you, I guess, get that job in Thailand? You're in a different country, you're kind of vacationing.
So through that internship in Bangladesh last, I actually networked, and I met someone who ran this organization, and her and I had a couple conversations, and I met with her once before. So while I was in Bangladesh, they gave us 2 weeks off for Ramadan. I went to Thailand because I'd never been there. I decided, would love to go, and was put in touch. One of my supervisors said, while you're in Chiang Mai, why don't you meet with this woman? So I met with her, and I loved her vision. I loved the role. I loved what she was doing. So during my senior year, I reached out and I said, well, I'm planning to be on Asia. Is there any chance that I could come work for you for a few months? And so I applied, got the internship. It was initially supposed to be for 6 months. I had some personal things come up, so I only worked there for 3 months. But I got a lot of experience. I discovered I love living and working abroad, especially places where I have no idea and I have no idea what's going on. I go in kind of with zero expectations. It's a lot of fun.
That's so cool. Just the power of networking and just reaching out to someone. Like, what's the worst thing they're going to say? Like, nothing's available. But the best thing, you'll get an opportunity like that.
Yeah. And it's not to say it was easy. I mean, every time I'd send that email, I'd draft, redraft, not send it, send and unsend it. So it's not to say it comes easily. It definitely takes a lot of, even now when I reach out to people for help on cases or to see if there's interest in like sharing cases or just for help, like, hey, have you worked on something like this before? I still go through that same process. I still get a little tripped out mentally, but once you get past that, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Before we move on from Thailand, so I visited Thailand last year, just vacation. I want to get your thoughts on Thailand, what you thought there.
Oh, I loved it. I really loved it. I thought everyone was really friendly. It was a very easy place to move to. I moved around a couple times while I was in Chiang Mai. It's not the easiest place to find an apartment. I think subletting is not allowed. They've put in a lot of restrictions because there were so many Western tourists coming in,
staying for a little bit, and then,
overstaying. There's a lot of sex tourism there. A lot of taking advantage of the lax laws. So they've gotten very strict. And that was around the time I was there. But I really loved it. I thought it was easy to travel around. I think Thailand is a great place to go, as far as if you've never traveled to Asia and first of all, it's the, epicenter of all the flights go through Bangkok. All the flights go through Bangkok. And it's also just, it's really great. The food's great. The culture's great. The people are great.
Were you only in Chiang Mai?
I was living in Chiang Mai. I went to Bangkok a few times. I really like Bangkok.
It's so similar to like New York City. I feel like, maybe a little more crowded even.
I think it's New York, like on speed.
Yeah.
I really liked it. I went to Bangkok a few times. I would go to the islands pretty frequently. I think I went to the islands 3 weekends in a row. To the point where the hostel recognized me and then I stopped going because that was a little too much for me.
So easy to get around too.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So you mentioned that before you took a break to go out do your travels that you took the LSAT. You took the LSAT twice. Was that the only times that you took the LSAT?
Yeah, I took it twice. The first time I took it, I want to say my senior year. Yeah, it was my senior year of law school. I'd studied through junior year, and then I took it my senior year. My score was fine, so I took it again, and it went up by 1 point. So it was
still
fine.
Got better.
Yeah, and it got me into law school. So I think the LSAT is out of 180. I think I got a 165, which is still, it's good. It's I think most schools want a 160 or above.
Yeah. For those that I guess that are looking to take the LSAT or are going to be taking the LSAT next few years, what advice do you have? Like, and how long did it take you to study for it? What's the minimum time you would suggest to study for the LSAT? And overall, what advice do you have for it?
I think it depends on what kind of test taker you are. I'm a terrible test taker. I get anxious. I second guess myself. I'm superstitious. Some of my friends are not like that. Things make sense really quickly. They're pretty confident in their responses. So I think the first thing is figuring out what kind of test taker you are. I studied probably 6-7 months, if not a year total, since I took it twice. For me, the repetitiveness of it helped. I would just take practice tests nonstop. Once you've learned the different things that the different sections of the LSAT, it's the games, which I think they've done away with, unfortunately, the reasoning and the reading comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the reading comprehension, the games and the reasoning ones have a pattern to them, and they've got tricks that you can learn to figure out to help you answer the questions or get to the right answer. Once you figure that out, and once you've memorized those and learned those and internalized those, it's just a matter of getting comfortable taking the test.
Yeah.
I went through so many practice tests. I'm looking at your LSAT prep book right there, and I probably went through 6 or 7 of those because you can
like
find
different years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can find every single LSAT test online. You can actually find them for free. After a certain point, you don't want to keep buying $20 books online for just one test. So you can download them for free online off of public library websites, or some students just upload them. You can find them. I found a lot of them on Reddit, and that was a great resource because I didn't have an income at that point, and it was nice to have a free resource I could use online.
Yeah.
But I would say it really depends on yourself. I would say at least 3 to 4 months of studying, though.
Yeah, before you take your first exam. So you took the exam twice, and I'm guessing the second time you got the score that you wanted.
I got 1 point higher.
Okay.
So, I went from a 164 to a 165, which was fine. It was a humbling experience. Yeah,
but it went up. So, at least it didn't go 1 point down.
Exactly.
So, if anything, it went up. So after, I guess, you took your LSAT, you did your traveling. That's when you start to look for law schools and applying to law schools?
I applied while I was in Vietnam.
Okay.
While I was backpacking, I applied from a hostel.
You're vacationing and you're like,
oh,
okay,
yeah.
it's time. I gotta get back to it.
I was working on my application in Bali. I did work with law school type coach. I can't remember how much I paid him, but essentially he helped me write my law school essay.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in one of the guest houses that me and my friend Anna were staying at, and she was going surfing and meditating, and I was writing my application. But it was fine, I think I'm a little bit of a workaholic, clearly.
Yeah.
So it was, and at that point I hadn't really learned the art of doing nothing. So it was nice to have something to do. I think if I were to redo it, I would take 2 years off, and I would work one of those years to get a little bit more real world experience before law school. But yeah, I applied. I worked on my application in Bali, and then I applied in Vietnam. I reached out to some people who worked at Fordham, who I knew through my personal network, and had a couple calls with them. They kind of walked me through the process, told me some of the stuff I needed to apply. They were very helpful.
Nice. So you started your journey at law school at Fordham University of Law. So starting out, I guess, is it 2 years or 4 years?
It's 3.
3 years, okay. Are they usually 3 years, law schools, or do they differ?
Law school is 3 years if you're a day student. If you're a night student, which, you're working full-time and going to school at night, it's 4.
Got it, okay. So during your time at Fordham University, did you do any more internships there? What's that experience like? And how do you go about, getting internships? Are they more intense than undergrad law-related internships?
Oh, yeah, I definitely did internships. So the first year of law school, my 1L year, that summer I worked for a judge. The thing with law school is they do encourage you to follow a specific trajectory, and that's the thing I struggled with in law school. They want you to do a judicial internship your first year, then work for a firm your second year, and then you get your offer for a firm that second year. I struggled with that. So the first year I did do a judicial internship. I worked with a judge on the second division of the second department of the appellate division. So the way New York courts are set up is you've got the Supreme Court, and then you've got federal court. Supreme Court is the state court, and the appellate division is the highest level that you can go at. And I enjoyed working with her. Would she had 2 interns in addition to me. We would work on a couple of projects together. We got most of our guidance or feedback from her clerk, but then she would also walk us through her thought process on certain cases. We got to go observe oral arguments. She gave me some really great advice as far as being a woman in the law. Always introduce yourself with your first and last name. Which is not something that is really expected of men, but for women, she said it's a good way to really mark yourself, make sure your name's pronounced correctly, and just stand out.
Yeah.
And it's good to be assertive in a very male-dominated field.
Nice. So that judicial internship was your first internship, your first year. And then second year, you said that they require you to work at a firm.
It's encouraged that you work at one of the big law firms.
Okay.
So that same summer, your first one of your 1L year, they have what they call OCI. I can't remember what that stands for, but what it is, essentially, it's all of the big law firms in New York, the top 100. They will come to your school and they'll interview people. So you'll apply that summer, and it is based on grades. That is all they're looking at, really.
Okay.
I struggled. So I did not get one of those jobs. I think I got really swept up in the way the law school model was and what everyone else was doing. I definitely lost sight of why I went to law school, which was I wanted to do human rights work, trafficking prevention work, reproductive and children's rights work. And I fully lost sight of that. So I went through that process and I didn't get anything. And I was crushed, which was funny. So I ended up spending a week with my family, kind of getting myself mentally right again. And then I started applying for jobs for the following summer. And I got a job working with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer, which was different, but I wanted something different. At that point, I kind of lost sight of why I was doing law, and I wanted to do something that felt a little different.
Yeah.
And that definitely gave me more exposure.
What do you mean by, like, when you say you lost sight? I guess what were the other students? What was the atmosphere like when you say you lost sight? What do you mean by that exactly?
I was really trying to work in one of the big law firms doing securities work, corporate work, transactional work, things that it's not uninteresting work. That's the problem with law. Everything becomes so interesting because we just like to work. It just wasn't what I had gone to law school to do. I had really wanted to work in specific fields, and I kind of just got swept up. My friends were all doing these big law internships, and they were working with these big companies doing these huge investments, or working on these big contracts, or it just seemed very glamorous. The money was really, really good. It was very easy to kind of get swept up in what everyone else was doing. And then the people doing the public interest work, the work that I was more interested in, Fordham had a really great public interest program, but it was kind of, you figure it out yourself more than anything.
Makes sense. And it's very easy when you're just surrounded by, a lot of people kind of with the same mindset. It's really easy to kind of lose sight. But I'm glad that you ended up eventually like realizing it and kind of going back on the path that you originally wanted to be on.
Yeah, I think where I really got back on track was my 3L, my last year. I ended up working for the ACLU, working on their immigration rights. And I got that role. I had a friend in law school who was working for them as an intern. And I mentioned to him that I had worked with refugees in college. I'd worked at the International Rescue Committee as an intern my junior year for the whole year. And so I had a lot of interest in continuing to work in immigration. I wanted to maybe go, I was thinking maybe I'll work with immigration again, refugee rights again. And so he put me in touch with the people hiring for that department, did a couple interviews. Actually had to delay a trip to Miami so I could make that interview.
It was worth it though.
It was so worth it. And I got it, and it was and I really liked it. It was eye-opening. It was probably the most difficult internship I've done because it was during Trump, and he had just put in the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, which is not at all what it sounds like. It is the policy that keeps asylum seekers, migrants coming through the Mexico border on the Mexico side, where there is high rates of trafficking, high rates of kidnapping, high rates of abuse. So it's a known danger. And what we were doing was trying to find a workaround for that. I think the ACLU was probably, I think they were gearing up to file a lawsuit because of the MPP. So a lot of what I did was research on the MPP.
Yeah. Wow. I think you guys probably had your hands full during that time.
Yeah.
So I know you kind of discussed what you did at the ACLU. After you did that internship, did you have a different mindset of kind of direction of where you want to go? Because that was your third year at law school, so that was your last year. You're kind of coming to the end of it. What's your mindset there? Because I'm assuming you're going to be looking for a full-time after that. What's your thought process there?
Yeah, because of that internship and because I was taking immigration law at the same time, and I was also, again, workaholic, I was also working for a professor at Fordham doing research for her on immigration. I realized I didn't want to work in immigration. The problem with the U.S. immigration code is it has not changed. Instead of, making certain laws, they just amend laws. They don't repeal any. They don't say that any of these are, let's get rid of them. They just keep adding on. So the immigration code is a book like probably this big.
Wow.
Like it's pretty intense and it's pretty rigid, and it's a very difficult system to work in. Your hands are pretty much tied. So I realized I didn't want to work in immigration law, but I wanted to do something international. I was taking an international law course. I spoke with the professor who had been an international law lawyer, and she said, well, if you want to do international law, you need experience in international law. So she recommended I look for jobs in aviation law, because lots of plane crashes happen abroad. And then you're going to be dealing with laws from different jurisdictions in different countries. So I started looking at aviation law in 2020 when COVID happened.
Oh my God. When all the flights, all the airlines went down.
Yep. So March 14th, we go into lockdown. I start emailing all the firms that I've been emailing, and I think I had maybe one or two that were open. I'd been talking to about maybe having an interview with. March 15th, nope, those were not happening. They said, we have no idea what's happening, but there are no flights.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much the end of that. I went into by 3L, a lot of people will have their jobs, and law school will make you believe that you need to have a job by your third year. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's very normal to take the bar and not have a job, but that was not what I knew, and it was definitely a source of extreme anxiety.
Yeah. So when did you end up taking the bar exam, I guess, after that?
My career path has been so funny because there's so many things that were so unexpected. The bar is normally in July.
Okay.
COVID happened, so they canceled the bar 3 times. I ended up studying for the bar for I think we ended up taking it in October, so I studied May. 6 months. You're not supposed to study it for that long. You start to plateau. Studying for the bar is really intense, and all the bar prep programs are made to be 3 months. So you're doing a lot of studying, a lot of work, a lot of memorization. You really shouldn't study more than 3 months because you can only absorb so much before. Right. I mean, you get overwhelmed. You start to plateau. I was having trouble having conversations at that point. I remember my sister, I was living at home because, again, COVID. I couldn't even have a conversation with my siblings. I couldn't hold a conversation if I didn't have to do with law. Yeah. So I ended up taking it in October 2020, and I didn't have a job lined up. But at that point, I decided, all I'm going to focus on is passing the bar, because once I pass the bar, I'm sure things will open up.
Yeah. How many times can somebody take the bar exam? Let's say if they fail, and do the future prospects, like job prospects, do they see how many times somebody takes the bar exam, or no? They just see if you passed it or not. And does that kind of like work against you if you take it a few times, you fail, but you end up passing it?
I don't think it works against you if you failed. Everyone agrees the bar is not a good measure of whether or not someone's going to be a good attorney. It's a memorization test. You're not analyzing anything, and you're just using very boilerplate laws. You're not analyzing anything. You're not coming up with arguments. It's multiple choice and essays.
Yeah.
So no one really thinks that it's a good marker for law, for how good you're going to be as a lawyer. But so as I mentioned, a lot of people will have their jobs lined up by the time they graduate. I know that if you fail it once, you'll have an opportunity to take it again. If you fail it twice, at that point, you're kind of just a cost to the firm you're working for, because you still can't practice law.
Right.
That being said, I don't know many people who have failed it twice. It's a matter of just studying for it. I don't think it works again. I mean, if I saw an applicant who had failed 2-3 times, look, as long as you passed it at some point, that's fine with me. I mean, I think Kamala failed it once.
Yeah.
So you could still be VP.
Yeah.
And potentially president.
True.
And no, you don't know. You won't know if someone failed.
Yeah.
But you can do the math. Like if you know that they're still not, if you don't see that they've passed the bar, or they're not barred by a certain point after they've graduated, you can assume that they just haven't passed
Makes
it
sense.
yet. Mm-hmm.
So where did you go from there, kind of chasing down your first full time? How did you come upon it, and what is that?
So once again, my network. One of my friends from law school knew that I was interested in human rights law, women's rights, and trafficking prevention. These were things I talked about nonstop. And she said she had a good friend who had a good friend who was looking to hire someone for a small firm that had just started working in Child Victims Act, in sexual abuse. So I reached out, I sent in my resume, and I was sitting down to take the bar exam when I got an email from this firm saying, we'd love to interview you. So I told them, yep, that would love that. I'm about to start the bar. I had gotten so many rejections that I didn't even want to wait a minute before responding. So I emailed immediately and said, I'm taking the bar right now, but can we talk later today? Like, you're insane. We'll talk next week. So that's how I got this job. The Marsh Law Firm, I interviewed with them about 2 weeks after I took the bar. So I had some time to decompress, and it felt very informal, but I realized it wasn't that it was informal. It was just everything that I had done in my career gave me skills that were translatable to this job. I had worked with victims before. I had worked with people I had worked in like trauma adjacent jobs before. So everything that I was bringing would be relevant to what I would be doing.
Makes sense. I'm sure that email that you saw from them offering you the job was a great motivator when you're taking the LSAT. You're like, now I need to pass this. I have a job lined up. So there's nothing holding you back there. I'm assuming you're still at Marsh Law Firm right now.
Yeah.
Correct? What does your day-to-day look like at Marsh Law Firm? How long have you been there again, by the way?
I have been there since November 2020, so close to 4 years.
Okay. So what's your day-to-day has been there? I mean, 4 years is a long time, so I'm sure it's changed over your time there. You've probably progressed in your, field and your roles. But what is a day-to-day like at Marsh Law Firm, and what type of cases, I guess, have you worked on? The ones that you can discuss, obviously. Yeah,
I'm going to answer that question in reverse and start with the cases. So Marsh Law Firm specifically or exclusively works in sex abuse litigation. And we do that across multiple levels. The bulk of our cases are under the Child Victims Act, which was a window from 2019 to 2021, which allowed survivors of childhood sex abuse to bring a lawsuit even if the statute of limitations had passed. In the same breath, the Child Victims Act also extended the statute of limitations. So whereas before, if you were abused as a child, you only had till 23 to bring a lawsuit. Now you have to age 55. But for 2 years, because they knew a lot of people wouldn't be able to take advantage of that window, of that new statute of limitations, they created a 2-year window where people could bring a case regardless of the statute. We have, I think, something like 1,400 cases at my firm. We partner with the second firm that's based in Seattle. Washington has been leading in child abuse prevention for decades. I think they haven't had a statute. There is no statute of limitations if you were abused as a child. You can, I think, for the last 20 years. So they have so much experience and so much knowledge in this field. I personally have between 40 and 50 cases. 30 of those, I would say, are Child Victims Act. The rest of my cases are either the Adult Survivors Act, which is the same thing as the CVA. It's just you were abused over the age of 18. They did the same thing. They opened the window. The GMVA, which is the Gender Motivated Violence Act, which is based on VAWA. And that actually, I think we have a handful of cases there. And then I just have standard assault cases, some revenge porn cases, things. The bulk is the CVA, and then there's what I would call, quote unquote, run of the mill sexual abuse, sexual assault cases. The other half of my firm also we have a big CSAM prevention, which is the child pornography prevention. Mm-hmm. And we have a team of about 3 attorneys who work on those cases. I drew a line there. I know my limits. I think that that's something that I don't think I'd have the mental capacity to work in. Yeah. So I do mostly the state litigation with the CBA.
Makes sense. During all the cases that you've done, obviously I'm not sure which one, if you can speak on these or not, but is there any cases that were, I guess, most challenging, and on the other side, cases that felt good once you worked on them, felt impactful, felt meaningful?
I think the most challenging cases tend to be the ones where the institution that we're suing, because we sue the institutions that enabled the abuse to happen. If you sue the individual who did the abuse, like the perpetrator, doesn't really enable or encourage change in the system. Yeah. Schools get to keep hiring abusers and not face liability. Hospitals can keep hiring doctors who abuse patients. Right. So once we sue the institutions, it's forcing these institutions to really be more cognizant of who they're hiring. But the flip side of that is it can be very difficult when you've put a client through years and years of a case, because these do stretch on for years for reasons that they shouldn't, for a result that isn't really what they should have gotten. I've had some cases where there was no insurance policy, or the insurance policy had written out sexual abuse coverage. And those cases, I've had clients who got much less than they deserved and continue to struggle day to day because it wasn't life-changing money, and it was almost like the institution was able to walk away from it as close to scot-free as they could. So those cases are really difficult. With settlements generally, the hard thing with settlements, because most of my cases that have come to an end have been because we've settled them. The difficult thing with settlements is no matter what, you're never happy. You always think you could have gotten your client more. Yeah. You always think you could have gotten a better result for them. And that's how you had a good settlement. Look, both parties are pretty upset because you met somewhere in the middle. Yeah. And that's where I struggled the most, I would say. I think that's where the emotions of the case come crashing down. That's where the vicarious trauma really comes crashing down. I usually take a half day off after I settle a case just to kind of get my mind right, and try to take some time for myself, because it's very easy to just fall into this mindset of, well, even though I got my client something and even though they're happy, it could have been more, and it will never make up for what they went through. And it's just very easy to get stuck in that.
Makes sense. Thank you for sharing those. Mm-hmm. And to kind of, before I jump off topic from, your career path, I want to kind of touch base on the salary ranges in the field of law. I understand that there is so many different paths you can go in law, like corporate law, commercial law, bunch of, and the field that you're in. But could you give an insight, I guess, in general, what salary ranges are for somebody going into being a first year, you
Mhm.
know, law associate, second year? What's that progression looks like? And if you have an idea of, I guess, different fields as well.
So if you're going to big law, like the top 100 law firms, doing corporate litigation or transactional law, your entry level I think is something like 225,000 now. It was 180 when I was there, when I was in law school. I think it's 220 or 225, something like that. And I mean, by your fifth or sixth year, you could be making $500,000 with bonuses. So you make a lot of money, but you're working a lot of hours. If you're going the public interest route, somewhere like legal aid, public defenders, starting salary is, I think, 75. There was an article about 10 years ago that said legal aid attorneys were working 2 jobs to make ends meet, and it caused a big, I mean, that's a big issue.
Right, yeah.
And so now the starting is 75. I started at 60. I don't think that, I think that was below market for sure. But again, I graduated in COVID. It was the only job I could get, so I jumped on it. I was able to get myself to 6 figures within the year, though, through advocating for myself, through we did get one really good settlement that meant all of our salaries went up. And then after that, it's good to keep looking around. I went to my firm a few times with counter offers from other firms and said, look, like, this is what I'm being offered at other places. And they agreed to bring my salary up in those cases. Nice. To keep me on.
Yeah, they don't want to lose a good talent.
So. Oh, yeah.
Now, kind of off topic from career, have you seen the TV show Suits?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I love Suits, and I've probably watched it a couple of times.
Same.
And when I watch it, I always wonder, like, how realistic is the events that take place in here, right? And since you've seen it, I want to get your thoughts on it. Like, how realistic is this show? And like, for example, like one of the things is like they, Harvey hands Mike hands Harvey a folder. So Harvey opens it. It's like, yep. It's like 2 seconds. Looks at it. It's like, I'm like, there's no way that they just took one glance at it and he knows the whole case. Like, it's done. But what do you think of that show? How realistic are the events in there?
So unrealistic. I think the most realistic part is how we're all just kind of like running around with our heads cut off. So unrealistic. I mean, as the associate, I'm supposed to be the master of the facts. So when I'm in court with either by myself or with a partner, the partner is usually looking to me to tell him and the judge what's going on. I mean, I've been in court so many times where I'm the one just offering up all the facts. I'm explaining what happened because I know the case back and front. Things do not get responded to that quickly. I will email something and then I'll follow up and follow up and follow up before I get an answer. And it moves slow. It does not move near. I mean, the one thing with Suits is it seems, you get a lawsuit or you get a client and then 2 weeks later you've got nope.
So fast.
It does not. I've had cases going on for 4 years. Yeah. And just getting a deposition set. We're August? I just set a deposition for November because that's how busy everyone is. Just trying to wrangle, all the law firms together for one single deposition takes us 3 months out. It moves slow. Very slow. And we don't dress that well every day. Yeah. Like most of us work from home at this point. I'm not wearing heels to the office. As much as I would love to be that glamorous New York City attorney, it's not realistic.
Yeah. Another thing in the show is, all the lawyers with the judges, they all seem to have like a relationship. They all know each other. Is that like that in real life? Like everybody knows each other, I guess?
Oh,
for
yeah.
years of working together?
Yeah, everyone knows each other. I mean, I was recently up in Westchester for a case, and the judge that's on my case now, she was transferred over from the Bronx. And the partner I was with knows her from way back. He walks in, he's like, "Hey, Your Honor, so great to see you. So nice that they have you in Westchester now and not the Bronx." Just kind of chopping it up with the judges. Yeah. And you do get familiar. I mean, Some of the judges out in Long Island are probably sick of me at this point. And then you also really get to know the other attorneys. I mean, because every specialty within law is so small, and the sex abuse world is tiny. I think there's something like maybe 300 plaintiffs attorneys in New York. Everyone really knows everyone. And so when you file a case and a defense attorney gets assigned and we see who's representing them, we're either going great or, oh God, not this one.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I'm glad I touched on that sweet spot, because I always watch the show and I'm always like, how realistic is this? It doesn't seem realistic.
You do get to know the judges. I think The Wire has a really great representation of judge and lawyer relationships too.
What is it?
The Wire.
The Wire. Is that another TV show, like law-based?
It's like police-based mostly. It's where Idris Elba made his coming out, or where he became big. And you just see judges and police and lawyers just interacting in a way that it really hits home.
Nice. To kind of wrap it up, I know we touched on this in the very beginning quickly, but I wanted to ask, what is your, I guess, advice to two groups of people? One, current students undergrad that are kind of wanting to go towards law school, towards that path. What's your advice for them in regards to, what they should get themselves involved with undergrad, but also what undergrad majors, would be beneficial? And the second group of people, kind of already professionals that are in other fields rather than law. And let's say they're 10 years out, right? Like they graduated 10 years ago. Let's say they're an accountant or engineer and they don't enjoy their career and they want to make a pivot into law. What would be your advice for them as well?
So for undergrad students, the one thing I would say is not to go straight to law school. I would say that having some sort of real world experience after undergrad is really beneficial, especially working in a law firm. As far as, what kind of degree to get, what kind of, things to put on your resume, this sounds cliche, but really things that you're interested in, things that you can talk about, because most of my interviews for internships, for law school internships, for jobs, we rarely talked about the nitty gritty of the jobs. It was like, why are you interested in this? What things would be translatable? And anything's translatable, really. But being able to talk about something and show that you're interested in it and you were passionate about it, it really it just really makes you stand out as an applicant.
Yeah.
But again, I would really say take some time off between undergrad and law school. I mean, to the point of undergrad, we've been in school 19 years, take a break.
Yeah.
I do think that working at a law firm before going to law school is the most beneficial thing you can do. I really struggled in law school. I didn't understand. I didn't even know that there were two different systems. I didn't know the difference between federal and state court. I didn't know what the Supreme Court was in the U.S. I didn't know what it was in New York.
Right.
So working somewhere, even for 6 months before going to law school, will make the world of a difference. I do know that people who worked at law firms definitely had an easier time. And for people who, are 10 years, there were definitely people in my class who were 10 years into their career. I think the director of what's that horror movie with like a priest coming in and trying to get a devil outside
Exorcist?
Yes, the director of The Exorcist was in my my 1L class.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was like 10 years into her career. She decided she wanted to be a lawyer. And if I got the wrong director, that's my fault. I know it was some sort of really well-known horror movie. But yeah, no, there were a lot of people who were coming in 5, 6, 7 years into their career and they were ready to make a switch, whether that was because they wanted to be the lawyer themselves and they were sick of dealing with lawyers, or because they were just ready for a change. I would say it's never too late to go to law school. Just be prepared for how much work it is.
Yeah. Would you say like their best chance of getting into law school, because at that point they're so far out from undergrad, would anybody look at their GPA at that point, and would you say their best chance would be to just get a really good LSAT grade?
I would say that your GPA becomes less and less important the further out from undergrad you are. And I can't really speak on the LSAT right now because, like the SAT, schools have been treating it very differently. So it's going to depend on the school you're at. They've been it's definitely been weighed. It's not weighed as strongly as it was before.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, Tatiana, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. You're doing amazing work, and I can tell by the experiences that you shared, your work is very impactful and meaningful. And I'm sure the audiences will be able to also use your journey and your experiences to their benefit and kind of maybe follow your footsteps as well and use your advice that you gave today.
Yeah. And reach out, networks.
Yeah, and I'll share your links, maybe
Yeah.
your LinkedIn profile as well under the video so people can connect with you. And maybe down the line in a year or two, we'll have you back on again and see where your career has taken you then.
Would love to.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.